From Flourish DX, this is the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. With workplace mental health becoming a safety prerogative, this is the source of information on psychological injury prevention and health promotion.
Hi, and welcome to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. My name is Jason and I'm one of the hosts of the show. The aim of the podcast is to rapidly increase the knowledge and application of psychological health and safety in workplaces worldwide. To help with this, we have regular guests from around the world who are leading the way in this important area. But before I introduce our topic and guest for today, allow me to introduce my co-host, Joelle Mitchell. How are you today, Joelle?
I'm all right, Jason. I kind of had to look at you then because you were on my screen as opposed to sitting next to me, so I couldn't really look away.
Yeah, and it was,
sorry about that.
It was better that you were right in front of me and I could,
you could look away.
Yeah, when you're to the side of me, it's like really distracting, so... Ben wouldn't know, the guests that we've got coming on soon would not know what I'm talking about because I don't think he would have ever seen this before, but yes. I'm slowly getting over it. It's
We'll see. We'll see what happens next time I'm in your peripherals.
Yeah, we'll see. Putting the yips behind me. Anyway, I believe, if I'm not incorrect, and I have been known to be incorrect once before, that
only once.
Yeah, it's like 1993 or something. That this will air the Tuesday before our Psych Health and Safety Conference. Is that right? You're the one that's responsible for when they go to air.
I am. I think it might be. Yes.
There you go.
You're correct.
So we'll be in Sydney when this goes to air.
What an exciting day that will be.
Yes. Well, the next day will be exciting, but the day before the conference.
Well, yeah, we've got masterclasses and things to do.
Yeah, that'll be great. So what are you most looking forward to, Joelle?
I'm most looking forward to having a photo with my whole psych team together.
Yeah, because you, as of next week, or if we're talking about we're recording this in the past before it goes out in the future. So as of the time
listeners will be listening to this, there'll be 8 people in my team plus me.
Yeah, and that's growing quite a bit, right? So the person we're going to talk to works, well, actually, I don't think you can consider it a startup anymore, but, when it was a startup, it was high growth. So you've gone from 1 direct report to 8 now in the past year.
In 12 months, yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah. Hyper growth, not quite, but we'll get there.
Hyper enough for me for now. Thank you very much.
Fun. Yeah, no, it'll be great to meet with the whole team and looking forward to seeing the whole community together over a 2-day event. So really looking forward to it.
I think that as well, right? Like meeting people in person is always good, especially those people that, you sort of feel like you've known for a long time but have never actually seen in real life. So, yes, there'll be lots of like, oh my goodness, it's you, types of interactions going on.
Yeah, and it'll be like, Jason's right, you are tiny, all this sort of stuff. So, yeah.
Or, what's Jason's problem? Just generally.
Yeah, Jason's such a jerk to you, Joelle, all the time. Like, how do you put up with him? Yeah.
I mean, people hear how I put up with you. So,
yeah, nice. That. Well, anyway, our guest for today is actually calling in from all the way on the other side of the world. It's, pretty much what's it called? It's the equipole or something like that.
What?
Unipole? It's like the exact opposite side of the globe. Anyway.
Do you know, I Googled that and actually Bermuda is the exact opposite side of the globe from Perth.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Because, when I was in Pennsylvania once, it was like pretty close to the exact opposite. I think I was like 100 kilometers off the seaboard. Anywho, again, we've sidetracked. I want to bring the person on.
As we do. Yes. Yeah. Too many side quests.
Yeah. All right. So this person holds a PhD in organizational behavior and theory and works in technology companies as a behavioral scientist and data scientist, specializing in improving team performance and driving the future of work. He's currently working as a senior behavioural researcher in Atlassian's Team Anywhere. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Benjamin Ostrowski.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here.
And great to have you on. Atlassian, like being a startup founder myself, and Atlassian being a proud export from Australia, is definitely a company that I have tracked for many years. And it's great to see the success and Sounds like a great organization to be a part of.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. I also, I don't know how many Australians I knew before working for Atlassian, but it's certainly had rapid growth. I work with Australians every single day, uh, and that's been lovely. I've picked up a lot of strange slang, and it's been fantastic. I feel like my vernacular has rapid growth as well. So
Yeah, we don't use
that's
that
been
word
great.
vernacular here in Australia. Yeah.
Still
Way
working
too
on it.
highbrow for us. Yeah.
And do you feel compelled to shorten and abbreviate people's names now whenever you meet them?
Oh, uh, I haven't picked up that in myself yet, but I find it endearing. You know,
And we'll confirm that you said that.
okay, yeah, let everyone know. Yeah, uh, we have a product Confluence, and everyone just calls it Connie, and that took me a little while to even know what anyone was talking about. But once I got it, I'm like, okay, that's what we're doing. Okay.
Yeah. It's pretty hard to shorten Ben, but common abbreviations are things like Shazza or Bazza or something like that.
Okay. Yeah, great to know. Yeah.
All right, Ben. Now that we've given you our hot tips on speaking Australian, what are your favorite podcasts?
Yeah. So I love podcasts that tell kind of long form stories. So This American Life is a super great one for car rides. Um, but honestly, the I one of the my favorite podcast niches is when people apply data to very unique topics. So that could be sports. I really like when people take really deep dive data analytics and apply them to little parts of the sports world. For example, that's one of my favorite things to do while I'm just walking the dog or in the yard or whatever. So, um, yeah, kind of a broad set, but uh, that's what I like.
It's nice that you've got a hyper-specific niche that you like to listen to.
It's the same with books. I really like books that are like 400 pages on the history of the banana or something. I
I
just want to
mean,
like know
if you're going to
everything
read
about
about the history of the banana, you might as well get into the proper detail of it, do it well or not at all. Um, so tell us about your professional career, please.
Sure. Yeah. So I got a PhD in organizational behavior, as mentioned. That was from Carnegie Mellon University, which is in Pennsylvania. I'm not sure which side you were in when you were there, Pittsburgh or Philadelphia, but uh, it's in Pittsburgh. And yeah, so I graduated with a PhD from there. And then I immediately went to work for an HR technology startup called Humu. Humu was focused on um, building a platform that delivered small behavioral interventions um, to folks throughout their workday to basically try to nudge them towards um, different types of more inclusive or more productive behaviors. Um, and so that was my first introduction to applied behavioral science in the tech world. Um, After that, I went to work for Duolingo, which a company that does language education technology. Um, that was a lot of fun, except I was working as a user experience researcher there, and I wanted to basically test out that sort of alternative career path. It's using a lot of the same types of tools that I was taught in my PhD program, but more on the user experience side. Um, it was fun, but it probably wasn't exactly for me. I did want to be doing, uh, you know, some more data heavy approaches, and so I was able to find Atlassian, uh, and there was an open role in their people research team at the time. And they brought me in, and they were kind of like, we have this thing called Team Anywhere, where we have people who can work from wherever they want. They're not constrained to an office, and we have a lot of data about it, and we've never really crunched any of it. And so it was a really exciting time to come on board.
Yeah, very cool. And you've been there a year and a half or so, is that right?
Yeah, that was last March. In that time, it's been a solid ride. I think it's not exactly like the smoothest sailing time for tech, just in general. So there's been some ups and downs, but overall, I've really enjoyed the attitude of kind of a giant startup where there's lots of problems to be solved, and the autonomy to go try to solve them. And that's something I really value.
So really interesting backstory, Ben. Really interested in Atlassian as a company, like I said, but particularly interested in your current role there. So you're a behavioural researcher. So what does that look like?
Yeah, it's a fair question. I think it's a role that is popping up more and more around the tech industry, but what exactly it entails is I think varies from company to company. In this case, though, quite broadly, it's really about conducting and applying research to whatever sort of problem is in the current scope. The conducting research side can take a lot of different forms. One thing that is very exciting about my role is that, as the problem comes up, we can use a different method to address it. And that's been something that's very, very exciting because, in your PhD, you're trained on all these different types of methods. And then when I made the transition to industry out of academia, I sort of assumed I'd be leaving a lot of those methods behind and mostly focusing on, say, survey design or survey analysis. What has been amazing about my role at Atlassian is there's the opportunity to conduct internal experiments, for example, which is, to be able to get back into experimental design and design control experiments, run them at scale. That has been it's an applied researcher's kind of dream because normally you sort of have to balance the plausibility of running any sort of experiment or running any sort of research project with, okay, well, we're probably not going to be able to determine causality in this way or all these different variety of drawbacks. And a lot of that just hasn't existed here because of the buy-in to the research process. So that's been super fun. And then on the applying research side, it's really about what we find from that research and then implementing it and trying to do so at scale, both internally and externally. That's what they don't teach you in your PhD. So that's what I'm kind of learning on the fly. And I'm really liking that part too, getting into the influence element and trying to see what fits and what doesn't.
Yeah, I can imagine working with a bunch of engineers, how they actually wouldn't mind, the rigor that you would put into your research. They would be very commonly using things like A/B testing to work out, what kind of UI or UX works best, or, what are the features that people are most interested in and actually work the way that they're intended to. So, I think that's fascinating, going from this. And we see this disconnect a lot with academia and people who are practicing, that often the questions that academia is trying to answer aren't things that can readily be applied within workplaces. So to have that research head, but in a practical work setting, and particularly one that's open to research and continuously improving, I think that's fascinating and such a cool role to be in.
Yeah, I was always the one, like during my PhD program when we'd have guest researchers come, I'd always be the one asking, like, how does this apply to real world organizations? Or like, how are you, your research is really great. How are you seeing it carried out in the real world, quote unquote? Uh, so yeah, I think I was always going to be a little dissatisfied with that gap. And so that's why this role is yeah, right where I'm happy.
So, Ben, what strategies do you use then doing research within an organization?
Yeah, so in that way it's similar to the academic process where you try to draw a little bit from existing literature or like what we know about problems that exist in almost every organization. Uh, Balancing that very strongly though with what we know or are learning about the current organization we're working with as well. So, you know, um, it's in terms of trying to understand what problem we want to target. It's a lot of talking to leaders and other departments within the organization, um, or trying to just check out whether it's our internal pulse surveys, what's popping up there, what are we hearing from various qualitative feedback forums we have throughout the organization, um, and then trying to balance that with what decades of organizational psychology literature have told us about like really common problems in organizations, or what do good teams do, or how do people in good organizations feel, um, and trying to balance those so we're both targeting a real problem that actually exists, but we're not sort of going by the seat of our pants at the same time. um, you know One of the fun things about that, fun and tricky, is like you can rely on the existing literature until the problem is unprecedented, which is kind of the case in a distributed organization. Atlassian's the largest company to do this distributed work thing, and so there's not too much to really lean on. And so that's fun in a lot of ways if you're cool with uncertainty, which I've had to become, like, because it's new territory. So um, that's exciting. But yeah, it's about gathering the data from as many sources as possible. It's also a dream as coming from academia to an organization that collects so much data. um, that was like, you have to fight tooth and nail, tooth and claw, whatever the phrase is in academia, to get like any type of data. So um, that's been exciting, and then cleaning and analyzing it and going from there.
So, it sounds like a lot of what you're using is data that's been collected for other purposes, and then you're kind of applying that to whatever it is that you're researching.
Yeah, it's probably split. So I would say half of my time, or half of our projects, are rooted in yeah. So like half of my role is deep level data analytics. So that's like what you just said, pulling data from either product usage um, or employee sentiment that was gathered for some other reason, and just like joining together all these disparate data sources, um, to find the patterns and try to see what is influencing what, and what we can learn from that. The other is setting out and creating projects of our own, collecting our own data. So that would be like an internal experiment that we run. Um, and what's nice is sometimes those overlap, where we can run the experiment and then pull in product usage data or something during that experiment. Join those sources up and say, we're seeing like folks who are doing XYZ. If we give them this intervention, they change in this way and they feel this much better about it. That's kind of the ideal we're going for. Um, and yeah, that data is captured in a lot of different ways. And then we've built up a strong team of people to recruit participants, and run the whole process. So yeah, it's an applied researcher's kind of like dream so far. Like I was really expecting to mostly be doing the pure data analytics side and just sort of leave causality out of it. So that's been fun.
Yeah, I can guarantee that there's a load of org psychs listening to this podcast just feeling incredibly jealous um, of that aspect of the work that you're doing, being able to just do that research and really look at, be able to explore causality with far fewer barriers than exist for most people who want to do that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I hope folks don't feel jealous. I hope more like inspired or something. But yeah, I think we have like my manager is a psych PhD. So like the organization Atlassian seems to have a history of valuing research, and so that's kind of been woven throughout the leadership team in various places, which means that there's at least that like fundamental understanding of the value of finding causality and finding ways of working that are rooted in evidence. So that's a valuable thing.
Yeah, so do you need more psych health and safety in your life? Then head over to the FlourishDX Academy for several free on-demand e-learning courses. If you're an internal professional, follow FlourishDX on Eventbrite to register for any of our free fortnightly interactive webinars. Our flagship professional practice program is also exclusively available for internal professionals. The 12-week course blends theory, applied practice, and interaction with other professionals through live lectures and a monthly community of practice session. Find out more about all these learning opportunities or inquire about a bespoke in-house training at the FlourishDX Academy. www.45003.org. Now back to this episode. That was shared on LinkedIn was some of the research that you and your colleagues did around your approach to distributed teams. Like you said, there isn't a lot of evidence out there around how to do that effectively and the benefits of working in and maybe pitfalls of working in distributed teams. So yeah, really interested to know a little bit about your approach.
Absolutely. This is kind of, this has been, so Team Anywhere was incepted, during the pandemic as a necessity. And then since then, they've kind of made the big bet that this is a better way to work, essentially, and that more and more companies will probably move to a flexible model as we go into the future. When Atlassian and when we talk about distributed work, what we really mean is any collaboration that's not done where you're physically in the same room together. So, basically work that's completed online. And so you could work for the same company. Honestly, you could be in the same building or in the same campus or something, but if you're not in the same room, it's probably distributed work. We hear it a lot, people go into the office and then go on Zoom calls or whatever, so like there's even within the same time zone, within the same, sometimes in those larger companies within the same campus, multiple buildings, they're still communicating online. They're still collaborating as if they're 12 hours apart like we are. And so, like our general perspective is that this leads to the best outcomes for the individual, the team, the company. We can get into all the potential benefits, and of course they're not without downsides, but the key point is being intentional about it, I think. One of the first projects I worked on when I got to Atlassian was understanding the intentionality of team design. And so we say work from anywhere, but we don't want to just throw, random folks together to build teams. We want to be intentional about it. And so we found, for example, this is intuitive, but if someone is isolated on a team, so they're, say, like 4 time zones away from the next nearest person, that team tends to perform worse. That person feels very isolated, not great. And so there are new problems that sort of crop up that in distributed work, but with some intentionality, you can solve them to still get those outcomes. So, it's going to be, I think it's going to be really interesting over the next decade or so to see how many companies move in this direction. Currently, we're seeing, I think generally the trend is younger companies are starting off a much more flexible model. Older companies, generalizing, but bringing more folks back to the office. And there's a lot of factors there. There are leases at play. There are sunk cost bias, all that stuff. But it's going to be really interesting to see moving forward.
Yeah, we're definitely seeing that ourselves, right? I mean, in the war for talent, when you're trying to get the right people, if you're, only looking at a certain city to try and get all your team, or a couple of cities, it's very difficult. That's why Joelle's team is distributed across, 3 different states, or 4 different states, if you include Perth. I think it's a sign of the times, right? Like when you want the best talent, particularly for desirable skill sets that aren't common, then you do have to be more open to having distributed workforces. But interesting what you talk about. Like you even class distributed as working on the same campus but in a different room. But we see that all the time, right? With things like focus groups that Joelle and the team run. Often, even if there's multiple people, who work together in the same office, because they often do have a distributed work team around the country or around the world. If everyone jumps on a Zoom call on their own device, rather than half of them being in a room and then half of them being on devices, we find that actually improves communication in those types of environments. So you can definitely see some of the benefits, and I guess we'll talk about those more explicitly as we go through this call with you.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And I was going to say as well, I think a key point is that the in-person experience is still super valuable. I think this maybe isn't as common a misconception anymore, but at first I think some of the pushback was, well, if everyone's always online, like surely there's some benefits to being in the same room and collaborating and growing those connections. And we agree. At Atlassian, we have we call them intentional togetherness gatherings, but basically every quarter or so, it generally fluctuates, maybe 2-3 times a year, 4 times a year. We bring teams together into one of our offices and do a week of, it's kind of a mix of higher level strategy stuff and just fun connection building, hanging out. And we see, a lot of benefits from those. Another piece of research I did early on at Atlassian was looking at the benefits on feelings of connection of those gatherings. And you can see this this big bump afterwards and then a slow sort of connection decay back to our baseline, but not for about 4 or 5 months. So, I think you can build these feelings of connection with really targeted, intentional time, and rather than sort of the mandate to come into the office every day and go about your business.
Yeah, well, that's certainly what we've been starting to do. We had what I called Psych Week over Christmas. So the team all came over to Perth, and we had sort of a week of doing some strategy work and some team building. We had our Christmas party and all of that. So and then we're 6 months later all getting together again for our conference. That's I'm glad that there's some evidence behind that strategy.
It sounds perfect. Psych Week sounds amazing, by the way. That sounds like something I love.
Well, yes, we thought it was pretty good. um, so the post that Jason mentioned that we reached out to you about was you were talking about data that you collected from over 4,000 Ship It teams. So what is a Ship It team?
Totally fair question. Ship It is Atlassian's twice annual hackathon. Um, what happens is, twice a year, there's a big, um, you know, people put out different challenge areas. They say, we want to solve this big, wicked problem. And then everyone can submit ideas. Other people can join those teams. People can recruit different roles to be on their teams. Say, we need a data scientist for this team. All that. So kind of classic hackathon setup. And the teams are formed organically like that. We have different sessions to pitch your idea or what you need. And the point with that from a data perspective is they're formed organically. They're not assigned in any way. And so we can see how the teams form, and then it provides this very nice natural data set of people sorting into different types of teams. And then we can basically use that to test the impact of team design on performance, because unlike just a classic project in an organization, in a hackathon, the results are very, the data is quite clean. We have whether someone went to a demo phase or not, and then everyone votes. It's kind of a wisdom of the crowds type voting technique for the projects that make it to the demo phase. So, that's basically how it works. But, when I joined and I learned about it, I was like immediately like, oh man, wow, what a great environment. And actually for me, one of my dissertation chapters was exploring innovation in a hackathon, very similar hackathon setting. So I was immediately, my ears perked up and I was excited about it.
Yep, fair enough. It's it's kind of like almost what you would classify as a natural experiment, but occurring within a business, right? Because the goal isn't to collect that data, but the data is just there as a byproduct of the goal. So yes, very cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there was 4,000 of these. Is it at one time, or is that over multiple years?
That's over multiple years. I believe that's about 8 years worth of teams. They've been, I forget exactly when it began, but longer than 8 years. But 8 years was when we began the current voting system of data. So that's where we cut it off. But it's 400 or so a session or each hackathon. And it's the beauty of a company that keeps its data and then you can sort through it.
Yeah, no, I definitely, Ship It. I'm sure we had a hashtag around that at some point in the early days, Joel, when we didn't have many customers, and it was like we need to push out new features quickly. So there'd be like, you do the testing, but at some point you just go like, ship it. We need to get it out there. So yes, I'm very familiar working with engineers and using that term. So with the Ship It teams though, and the research that was conducted over those 8 years, what sort of data did you collect about the teams?
Yeah, so we had measures of the, at the team level as an aggregate of the individuals. So, the main element there that emerged as being important was the level of diversity of the team. Not necessarily talking about demographic diversity, but in terms of expertise. So We looked at, for example, how many different departments were represented on a given team, how many different levels, so more junior, more senior within the team, and then, of course, where they were located in the world. So how many unique time zones they were across, for example. Um, we then had some survey data about how the teams interacted, how they felt they did. A little bit about, like, to your point about how much code did they write? Did they ship this thing actually, like the goal of the, the goal of the hackathon? And then, as I mentioned before, we have the outcome data about the first stage is submitting a demo. The second stage is having folks vote on it. So we had sort of a binary, did a demo get created or not? And then after that, how highly were they ranked based on voter preferences?
And so what did your data suggest about the performance of distributed versus local teams?
Yeah, so we had some cool findings. I was really, going into it, I wasn't sure exactly what to expect. I was genuinely curious of what we'd find. I mean, the hackathon is only about 2 days long. So I sort of had competing hypotheses where in my head, I could see how being together in person, like co-located, everyone on the team is right there, would be very beneficial because of such a short amount of time. It's very compressed and you need to work very quickly. And but on the other hand, I was thinking, well, as we've alluded to so far in this conversation, the more distributed your team is, the larger your quote unquote talent pool to draw from is. And especially in this case where you might need a very specific set of expertise to carry out a problem or to carry out a task for a specific problem, for a specific solution, it'd probably be nice to be able to draw from all 12,000 employees instead of like whoever is in the San Francisco office. So those were the competing hypotheses. And basically we found that the latter of those was correct. So teams that were distributed, meaning that they had at least one member who was not co-located in the same office and local to that office, were more likely to get to reach the demo phase, and more likely, and then once they reached the demo phase, they were ranked higher within the voting system. The main mechanism that emerged there is they were more diverse. So if a team was distributed, it was more likely to have more unique levels, a wider range between, say, the lowest level on the team, more junior folk, and the highest level. There were more departments within Atlassian that were represented on those teams, and then obviously more locations represented as well. And so when you throw that in there, it really predicted, it was the strongest predictor of what we were categorizing as novelty or creativity, right? Like the innovation side of things, which of course is not surprising at all, really. It's a decades old finding that diversity can drive innovation. So that was cool. But what was also interesting was that those distributed teams were more likely to reach the demo phase. That was particularly surprising because, a sort of classic dichotomy is heterogeneous teams are more likely to, have a higher innovative potential, but homogeneous teams are better at sort of executing on a task. But in this case, the distributed teams were better at both. So there we have some theories on why that might be the case. One thing we found in past research is that distributed teams are better at documenting their work, probably because, if we're only online together for like an hour, we have to really nail down our asynchronous communication. I have to write really good documents for you to read, really, hand off work quite well and just sort of get better at that skill. And so, and the segue on that is also we have a sort of longer workday, if you will, as a team, where I can work for 12 hours, hand off to you, you work for 12 hours rather than us being online at the exact same time. I think in a hackathon setting, that's probably particularly important if it's only 48 hours anyway. But now you add in US nights essentially are also getting worked, sequentially. So that's what we found. It was cool. I'm excited about it. I think, it was kind of timely because at that time there was a lot of chatter in the industry that distributed teams, you couldn't innovate in a distributed environment and that creativity happens like in the room. So I think that was nice to sort of push back a bit against those narratives.
Yeah, excellent.
Yeah, and obviously Atlassian have some great tools for asynchronous working. Trello is something that we enjoy using within our team. So even one of our devs has created some of his own, what do you call them, like apps or something, or plugins, I think they're called in Trello. To be able to enhance, I guess, how we're able to work asynchronously together across, different states and time zones. So some very cool tools out there these days as well to support that type of work.
Love it. Yeah.
So this podcast in particular is looking more at, mental health outcomes in workplaces. So I'm interested to know, was there any, mental health related data collected as part of the research?
So not in terms of the ship it teams, but we do collect that data about both internally and externally about the impact of workplace flexibility, and it's one of the stronger drivers of motivation, I would say, for me, and I think I speak for my team as well, and anyone who's sort of within Team Anywhere, because the outcomes are just so overwhelmingly positive from an employee mental health and happiness perspective. Every day I feel like I wake up and there's more research that's come out about flexible workplace being more inclusive for XYZ group of people, like basically you name it. And so that's a really motivating factor to continue trying to perfect, or at least, move towards perfection on the ways of working side of things, because the inclusivity and the benefits to mental health and well-being are so apparent so early that I sort of feel this duty to nail down the how to do it so that more organizations will take it on, because it's not the default way of working, and so people will tend to default towards in-person gatherings, or like if our stock price starts plummeting in this way or going down, but we see like some signs of trouble, one of the easiest things to do is to just bring people back to the office. But of course, then you introduce commuting, you take parents away from their children, you put people of color back in places where they might not necessarily feel comfortable, LGBTQ community, like you just go on. And so I think the benefits are so tangible, and we see it in the data all the time, but it's not the norm. And so there's this sort of urgency to map out the way to do it and to show the actual benefits, sort of unfortunately, but from to the bottom line, so that the employee population can realize some of those benefits.
Yeah, and like you say, as a A researcher or, say, an organizational psychologist working in a workplace will generally look at the literature first to go, well, how have others done this, or what does the evidence suggest is the best way to do it? So yeah, it's great to see some of this stuff being documented and shared out around, if you're going to do this, these are the things you need to consider to make it work effectively.
So, like from a ways of working perspective, like what have you identified in terms of either organizational or team level processes or structures for that matter that seem to work better for distributed teams?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this is basically, the whole job, which is really fun. And as I was mentioning, but before the call started, we're at the end of our year here, and so we're wrapping up all the work and the research that we've done this year and building a full-on toolkit of different strategies for, and it is for distributed work, but it's really for all teams. I mean, some problems are just exacerbated or uh, whatever the opposite of exacerbated, less so. I don't know. But, like,
Minimized?
yeah, minimized. Right, there you go. In distributed teams. So obviously time zones are a real thing. So we have to deal with them in these ways. But finding time to meet, calendar overload has been a problem forever. So that's still a problem in a distributed environment. Sometimes it's just slightly different because of maybe time zones or whatever it may be. So we cover a lot of topics like taking control of your time and avoiding those endless meetings. I talked a little bit about on the grand scale of in-office work being the default. We also talk a lot about trying to change folks' mentality of the in-person meeting as the default mode of collaboration, when it's often better to do some work asynchronously. Meetings can quickly overload and lead to burnout and all this other negative stuff, but they're useful for a very small or they're useful for a small amount of specific tasks. And so what we're trying to do is just align people's mental models of the collaboration type to the task itself. We're experimenting a lot with AI to this point to help folks. We built this AI model that is trained on our philosophy of how to write clearly and concisely, because people their default when they move to asynchronous communication is to write a lot, which is essentially the same problem as a lot of meetings. What's the quote? I didn't have time to write a short letter, so I wrote a long one. Like that, things like that is what we're trying to get past. And prioritization of work. We have something called the $10 game, where you have $10 at the beginning of your week, and that represents your time for that week. And so, we have folks allot those dollars to specific tasks. And it's really helpful to play that game and sort of lay it out and say like, oh, I'm spending a lot of time on a task that is pretty low priority. And so those are just some of those interventions. Again, all of those they exist no matter where you work. So we're trying to help all teams, but I think they're particularly relevant for distributed teams.
And so you said you're sort of compiling and pulling all of this together. Is that something that you're going to make available outside of Atlassian?
Yeah, absolutely. So at Atlassian, we have, we've shared a few places so far that have sort of aggregated our research to this point. When we hit let's see what it was, I guess the 3-year mark, we put out a report called 1,000 Days of Distributed, which that came out around December. And so that was a summation of a lot of our research and what we'd found. Since then, we've been really developing the practices that go along with those research findings and how to really put them in place, and building out a toolkit that hopefully can help a lot of teams do this. So yeah, stay tuned. We're working on it. I think it'll be cool.
Yes, definitely. Sounds like a really useful resource.
Yeah, Ben, you doing anything June next year? Want to come out to
Yeah,
Sydney?
do you feel like coming to Sydney?
I'm
You know-
sharing some of this great
You know what?
information.
So obviously work for an Atlassian company, have yet to be invited out there. So
Oh,
Well, here's
it's
the
one of
invitation,
my major
but
goals.
yeah, get your bosses to pay for it though. So,
Yeah, right.
So are there any contexts though in which you would advise against establishing distributed teams?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Obviously there are some industries, right, and types of work that just require in-person work. Some medical teams, some manufacturing roles like that. So that's certainly the case where like some work you just can't bring it online. Um, but uh, you know, in general, a distributed team theoretically should it just should be um, more beneficial for the things that I've laid out. I think the key is having the ability to do that hybrid format, right? Like being able to bring people together when it matters, um, and that can be tough. There's a lot of budgetary constraints, right, and logistical elements of flying everyone together, and so that's where some of those team design elements and like the policy can come in. So maybe it's not, as I was saying earlier, a given team isn't comprised of people from literally anywhere in the world, but it also doesn't have to be only within Sydney or something like that. You know what I mean? So I think there's a moderation element to it where maybe even when we first moved to Team Anywhere, we were a little too lax with it. Just logistically, it hasn't made sense. It's made some people's, if you're on a team and you're in Australia, everyone else is on the East Coast of the US. That's just like not going to be a fun time. So, so there are some elements there. So I'm sure there are some more individual use cases where, you just have to be working together in person every day. But what I would really preach, I guess, is, as usual, moderation in it. Design the teams appropriately so that you can balance flexibility with, being able to bring people together when you absolutely have to. That's what I would say.
and what advice would you offer to employers who are just sort of getting started with distributed teams?
What I would say is trust your employees. I think one of the tougher elements and potentially one of the things that holds certain leaders back from this work is just not being able to see the work happening, quote unquote, which I think is founded on two incorrect assumptions. One, that work was always being done in the office, and two, that work is not being done if you can't see it. I think distributed work is really based on a lot of trust. I forget which of our CEOs said it recently, but and he was like, "Don't hire idiots." What he basically was saying was, trust your employees. Like he's like, I hire good people. I know they're doing the work. So, I think that's helpful to think about. And on the employer side as well, the data is just overwhelming that your employees will be happier in all likelihood. And so whether you care about that as an ends of itself it's also a means to productivity. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, productivity, retention, organizational citizenship behaviors, a whole raft of positives.
I'm glad it came up, talking about leaders, because that's probably the biggest barrier I see to distributed work happening, is when you have your old command and control leaders who are like, they haven't seen distributed work before, right? Maybe before the pandemic. And they're like, yeah, they need to be in the office. I need to be able to see them. And that's a big switch, right? When you can't see people and you have to, like you say, operate a lot on trust. That work is getting done, even if you're not guiding people every step of the way. So it's a big shift, I think, for many leaders, particularly those who've been in the workforce for maybe 20 or 30 years and done it a certain way.
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of those folks have made it to where they are in a format that they're used to. So then to say, let's try an entirely new format, in a lot of ways doesn't make sense. So, I understand. I definitely understand that from that element. And then also on a manager level, like a sort of the mid-level management level, it can be difficult to get a gauge of your direct reports, well-being kind of on a day-to-day basis. Like, Joelle, maybe you feel this, I don't know, but my manager says a lot. She says, y'all have to like tell me if you're overworked or if you're running into 30 roadblocks today, because it is more difficult to see that. I mean, you could argue you might not see it at the office either, but there are objectively fewer opportunities to just sort of run into someone and say, like this day or whatever, so we're trying to create more of those avenues through some of our interventions, like just more places where folks are in a space together, sharing things that aren't necessarily like just targeted towards achieving the next task. But that's one of the barriers of distributed work, I think, from a managerial perspective, is even if you trust your employees, it's about also just understanding how they're doing.
Yeah, that definitely becomes more challenging. So I think it's like you just have to be more intentional with looking for those things and making sure that you are having those regular catch-ups and actually sort of covering all of those issues, and giving them opportunities to vent, and also within the team opportunities for them to just chit chat and do that water cooler talk, but it's the virtual water cooler instead of the real one, which sometimes feels like wasting time if you've got people in a meeting together and they're just sort of chit chatting about nothing. But in a virtual team, I think it's definitely not a waste of time. It's an important use of time.
Yeah, one thing we're trying out, we're calling it team time for now, but we're trying out this new sort of form of gathering that I think falls between those two. I don't think we haven't had great success with people with the sort of virtual happy hour type of deal, right? Like, it just doesn't. It's sometimes it maybe can work in like a really great setting, but a lot of times it's just tougher for some of these reasons. But then the alternative is like, oh, maybe we're constantly only we're only talking about task work, and we're just doing task work a lot. And so what we're trying to have folks do, we're running an experiment as we speak, is have teams. It's really like sets of collaborators come together and just sort of block off an hour or two, and they're in the same room, same Zoom room, and they're working on their project together, but there's no mandate for the amount of chatting they do. So they'll be sort of doing their own work, maybe cameras off, but they can pop on real quick to like ask a question or bounce an idea off each other, chat about something, go back to deep work, come back. There's, I don't know if y'all are familiar with the research on what's called burstiness, but there's a communication pattern that emerges in high performing teams over and over again, and it's bursty in the sense that teams that will talk a lot at once and then talk almost not at all, and then talk a lot and then not at all, and we see that pattern as beneficial, whether it's within an hour setting, within a week, over almost any time period. And so we're trying to encourage this bursty behavior that hopefully sort of reduces the barrier to some of that chit chat, but hopefully without the forced sort of nature of like, we're just drinking a beer and now in front of a computer, so we'll see. Well, again, stay tuned, but it's a very real problem, I think, and we're trying to get at it.
See, Joel, you have to stop chastising me for like coming in and interrupting the whole office, and because it's bursty.
I don't think that fits into the definition of bursty, Jason.
What are you talking about?
Because you need to give us time to be quiet in between the bursts.
Well, yeah, when I'm out of the office, you got plenty of time. Yeah.
It's on the border. I don't know. Yeah. Could go either way.
Yeah, nice. Well, Ben, it's been fascinating talking to you, and I'm serious. We'd love to get you across to Sydney next year if we can wrangle it. So we'd love to keep in touch. But at this point in time in our podcast, we like to move the question back to mental health and thinking about the future as well. So I'm sure you've got some thoughts on this. If you were to think about the future of workplace mental health, okay, beyond just distributed teams, which has been the majority focus of this discussion, what would your hopes be?
Yeah. My hope is for a much more inclusive workplace. Obviously, the focus of my work every day, is very, very much on how teams work together to get work done. And that leads to, in my case, distributed work. But I think what it's really about is, at least within my realm, my like toolbox is trying to get this flexibility element. I think that's one of the key drivers to mental health in the workplace. I hope we can move more towards that as an industry and a society, because the flexibility allows for so many more experiences to be included in the conversation than the ones that are the archetype or the dominant force. We all know what the general CEO population looks like, and it's all just going to filter down from there, right? So it makes sense for people to build things sort of in their image. And so there are a whole bunch of factors that can work to sort of equitize that process. And I think flexibility is one way to do that, and just allow people more room to be who they want to be in the workplace, along within their individual lives. So that's my hope moving forward. I hope we can get to a place where people feel comfortable at work. I have felt, in my PhD program, I felt uncomfortable almost the entire time. And I always tell people I felt like I feel like I've learned more in this past year than I did for the entire PhD program. And so like that alone always tells me I can't quite imagine how folks feel in the office if they're uncomfortable, and the odds of them doing their best work just skyrocket if you can help them feel more comfortable in whatever way. So I think everyone has an ideal work situation, and there are some constraints to it probably, but that would be my hope moving forward.
Yeah, it'd be great to see. And it's what you're talking about there is also a lot about person job fit. And listening to you talk and spark up regarding, real world research that actually has practical implications. You can never have worked as an academic, mate. Like, there's no way.
I know. Yeah.
So last question for you, Ben. Do you have any words of advice for listeners who want to work in the field of workplace mental health?
Yeah, I would say, be authentic and try new things. That's what I would say. That can apply across a lot of scenarios, I suppose. But one of my favorite things about theory is it can be applied in so many different ways and avenues, and it's sort of technology agnostic or method agnostic. And so I have found that, trying to keep that North Star of the motivation out ahead, and then within that next layer, just fooling around and trying new things whenever I can, is, it's like keeping your ears and eyes open, and just being ready to hop on any opportunity that comes your way, because I'm not sure the employee, or at least even the broad mental health population problem is necessarily prioritized very highly across the board in a lot of places. And so I think there's a certain element of creativity that's just going to be necessary to infuse existing capitalistic processes with any sort of target towards it. I think we're moving. We've seen a lot of growth over the past however many years. I think organizations are getting better. The people doing the work are well intentioned and motivated generally. But I think we have to fuse it with almost all of the innovations we can to really get it in there. So AI is a great, top of mind topic, for example. So I try to work as best I can within the cutting edge while keeping those motivations in mind. And, TBD if that works out, but that's what I would say so far. That would be my advice.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ben.
Ben, thanks again for getting up early this morning, mate, and sharing your really interesting and obviously very timely work. There's a lot of people moving to distributed teams or have been doing it for a while, and a lot of learnings to be applied to make sure that businesses run well and obviously has a positive mental health benefit for workers as well. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a blast.
Well, listeners, that brings us to the end of this episode. Remember, we do record these conversations over video, and you can catch those videos on the Flourish DX YouTube channel. We also take the best bits, the short 2 to 4 minute snippets of gold, and you'll find them on the Flourish DX LinkedIn page. What am I doing? It must be getting late. While you're over on LinkedIn, feel free to connect with Joelle and myself. And Ben's a friendly guy. We reached out to him over LinkedIn, and he was very happy to jump on our podcast and share his amazing research as well. So if you want to continue the conversation, that's the place to do it. But that brings us to the end of today. We'll catch you next episode.
You've been listening to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. To stay up to date with the latest on psychological injury prevention, follow Flourish DX on LinkedIn and subscribe to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast at www.psychealthandsafety.com.